In this video we're going to be showing you how to change the front wheel bearings on a 2008 to 2012 Chevy Malibu. We'll be showing you all the steps on how to do that right after this. Hey guys, Alex here from All For Him Racing. Today we're changing the front wheel bearings on a Chevy Malibu. Model years of 2008 to 2012. However, we can follow a very similar procedure for earlier Malibus and other GM models as well, so make sure to do your research. The first step here that we're going to be doing is we need to get the car jacked up and safely mounted with the jack stand. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to find the proper jack points that are on the car, located right behind the wheels, and we're going to jack it up and then brace it up with the jack stand. Now we're going to use the jack stand because you never want to be working underneath the car with just the jack holding it up. You always want to have a jack stand or some other means like a block in order to hold it up. So we're going to go ahead and do that first. Get that all lined up. Then we're going to lower the weight onto the jack stand while also keeping the jack in place as well. So a good way to test to see if your wheel bearing is in fact actually bad, a good thing to do is to jack your vehicle up and then put your hands across at adjacent sides and then simply rock back and forth. So you guys hear that? That's movement. That means that the bearing is now loose and is no good and needs to be replaced. Next step is we need to remove the front wheel itself, so we're going to go ahead and actually loosen the lug nuts and then take the wheel completely off. Now that we have the wheel removed from the car, let's go ahead and actually start the disassembly. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take the caliper off the car. And the way we're going to do this is we first are going to have to relieve some of the pressure that is in the system from the brake. So the way that I like to do that is by using a large C-clamp. So the way I do it is I take the C-clamp, I put the piece in here, and then what we're going to do is just simply lightly compress this caliper. Remove the pressure against the pads and allow them to come off more easily. So just enough that the pressure is relieved. Now, we just changed the brake pads and rotors on this car not too long ago, just a couple months ago, and so we're going to go ahead and actually use the same parts again, but this would also be a great time, if you have not done so, to change your brake pads and rotors. Okay, so as proof that that is loose, you can actually move this back and forth, so that's good. That means we got some play. So the next tool we need to have is a 14mm socket. That's what this car requires. There's a bolt on the top of the caliper and one on the back side. These two pins, we're going to loosen those up. I like to loosen both of them first and then remove. Now I did a good job at greasing these the last time I took this apart. So these are coming out, once they're loose, they are coming out right by hand. Okay, our two bolts. Now that those have been removed, you can simply lift your caliper away from the rotor and up and out of place. Now what I would suggest you do in this case, obviously this is now floating, and so we're going to need to affix this to the strut tower using some means of like a bungee cord, a wire, zip ties, whatever is your choice. So I chose to use just a couple zip ties and just wrap them around the coil spring and in through the one eyelet, being careful to make sure that to not pinch the rubber brake line that attaches to the caliper. Now we can go ahead and remove the brake pads. They may come out by hand, but if not, you can go ahead and actually use a flathead screwdriver and lightly pry in between to pull the pads out. So there's the front, and then there's the back side. Make sure to label them or put them in a place that you can remember where they went. Next step is to remove the bracket that actually held the caliper in place. There's going to be two bolts on the back side. Try to get a better camera angle for you guys, but go ahead and remove those bolts using a 15mm socket. Again, I like to loosen them first. Alright, they are both loose, and now we can go ahead and remove. Again, once they're loose, you should be able to do this by hand. If not, feel free to keep using your ratchet or penetrating oil if you need to give yourself a little bit more help. Okay, got the other bolt removed. This just simply slides off the end. We had 2 of these green bolts. Now that that is completed, you can go ahead and remove the rotor from the car. The next step we're going to do is we're actually going to remove the nut that holds the axle, this is the axle shaft, to the hub itself. Now this nut is, according to my research online, is a 35mm socket, but we've got a 36 already in the shop for use on a similar car. So we're going to go ahead and just test the fit here and make sure it's good. Yep, it's a little loose, but it's still good. So if you have a 36mm socket, that'll be sufficient for this. And we're going to go ahead and remove this nut. Now you're going to want to make sure your car is in park, obviously, for this. And go ahead and pry. Okay, there it goes. It's starting to turn by itself. Go ahead and keep using the socket a little bit here. And you may have to help it the rest of the way off. But just simply keep screwing until you can remove that nut. Now that the nut is removed, we need to drive this shaft in order to disengage the splines from the shaft. So the way that I like to do is either use a wood block or something soft like shop towel, like this in this case, and a hammer, and then lightly tap and drive it out the backside. There you go. You can hear it come loose, and now it is disengaged from the hub. Next step is we've got to actually unbolt the hub here from the main support. So there's 3 bolts, one on top, one at about 4 o'clock, and then one again over here around 7 o'clock. And the way that those are reached is from the back side, and we're going to use a 13mm socket. So again, go ahead and loosen them all up first. Okay, got one loose. Now let's go to the one on the back side here around 4 o'clock. You may find that you need a little bit more leverage, so don't hesitate to get something with a little bit more leverage in order to pry on these bolts. Okay, got the second one loose. All we gotta do is loosen the top one. Alright, so now we've got all 3 of them loose. So now we're just going to go ahead and take them out the rest of the way from the back side. And like with a lot of this, once it's been loose, it comes out relatively easy and by hand. And again, if not, go ahead and use your wrench or socket, whatever means you're using, to take them out the rest of the way. So as these bolts come out, this extra guarding and shield for the brake rotor is going to come with it. It's actually sandwiched in between the hub itself and the main bracket. But one thing we got to remove is actually on the back side here, which is our ABS power lead. Okay, so here's the ABS plug that I was just mentioning. As you can see, this is the main plug that actually plugs in to the hub assembly. So there's this gray tab. We're going to simply pull down on that and then push away, maybe wiggling slightly, in order to pop this out. Now be careful, it's really easy to break that tab. Okay, now that that is unplugged, we can go ahead and actually remove the main other end of this plug from the housing bracket. So the way that this works is this tab on this side gets pushed in, and this tab gets pushed in, and then it goes down in through that slot. So you may need to use a screwdriver in order to get a little bit extra leverage to push in, but then we're simply going to work this back and forth and then pop it through that slot. Now, the hub assembly is unplugged from the car. Alright, so let's go ahead and actually get these bolts out the rest of the way. So we're going to take the one out from 12 o'clock. Okay, there's that one. The one from 4 o'clock, as I mentioned, there's the other one. And we'll loosen this last one up here That was in the 7 o'clock approximately position. And there's the third one. So now the hub is loose. Next step is we have to remove the hub itself, and in order to do that we're actually going to use a pretty hardy hammer, and we're going to hit on opposite sides trying to drive it out, and we're just going to simply loosen that up. There we are. So push on the center axle here, or maybe even give it a light tap. Again, to make sure the splines are disengaged. And then this whole hub will slide out. And then again, be careful of your shield here. So the plug's going to have to go through that hole, so be careful to make sure that that is adequately lined up. You may have to work a little bit to get that through safely. But there we are. The whole assembly comes out. Now that you got it apart, you're just going to want to simply go ahead and actually clean up the steering knuckle here. Go ahead and you can use a wire brush, maybe even a screwdriver. I'm just going to use a flathead. Just clean up some of this oxidation that's on here. Make sure you get the shaft good and clean as well. You don't want any debris in the spline joint. And make sure the knuckle is clean of debris. The reason we want to clean this is it just simply makes the assembly of the new part a lot easier. Next step, go ahead and get your replacement part opened up and ready to go. This particular one had a plastic piece that slid in the back here that held the wire in place, the plug, and keeping it from getting damaged. But you can see this is the piece right here. The replacement part we decided to go with was actually a low-cost solution. It is from Detroit Axle, and here's the part number. It is K513214. I'll provide a link to this part in the description below, so be sure to check that out. As well as if you wanted to go with the OEM replacement, it is most likely an AC Delco. I'll try to locate that number and place it down below as well if you want to stay true to that. But this particular part was half the cost, if not actually a little bit more, than what the standard OEM replacement part was. So you want to put like an anti-seize or some kind of a penetrating oil in here just to make it a little bit easier to slide together. Alright, so now it's time to actually put this thing back together. So we're going to take our shield and just sit that approximately into place. Next we're going to take the hub itself, and with the connector, making sure that the connector is facing towards the rear of the car, and we're going to slide that through both of these holes. So we're going to go through here, and then again, also then between the knuckle and the axle. Be careful not to break the plug itself, so we'll slowly wiggle it back in through. And there you go. Now you can go ahead and actually line the hub up with the spline and slide this carefully all back together and in place. So we'll get it most of the way in, and then you can go ahead and rotate the shield the rest of the way. And there we go. So now all we have to do is actually go ahead and put it back together the same way we took it apart. So the first thing to do is take those 3 bolts, and again coming from the back side, making sure that it fits through, and start screwing them into the hub. Again, do this as much as you can by hand at first. You don't want to cross thread anything. You want to make sure everything fits as it should. So go ahead and get them all started by hand, and then tighten them up, again using the 13mm socket. Now, due to the tight fit, you're going to have to actually do this in stages. So what I'd suggest you do is just kind of work your way either in a clockwise or a counterclockwise pattern, slowly tightening up each bolt and snugging them up. Okay, so now they're good and snug. They were tight to come off, so make sure they're tight when you put them back on. And so next step is we're going to go ahead and actually put the nut back on the main axle shaft. So screw that on as far as you can by hand, and then take your socket and slowly start to turn that back on. And as you turn it on, you're going to slowly actually pull the axle shaft back out, line up those splines. I mean, you're going to have it partially already lined up, but it's going to draw it in the rest of the way. Okay, so you're going to go until it gets tight, at least snugged up, and then we're going to go ahead and actually give it a good pry here. Okay, good and snug. Okay, next step is to take your rotor and line this back up and into place. So make sure that's lined up as it should. Again, a great opportunity to change that if you need to change it. Then we're going to take the mount here that actually mounts the caliper into place, and we're going to slide that again over the rotor. Line it up approximately to where it needs to be on the back side, and start these bolts by hand. You may have to wiggle them a little bit. Okay, I got that one started. Maybe a little trial and error to get this, but again, do it all by hand. Get it all started by hand so as not to cross thread anything. I suggest at least getting one most of the way snug by hand. And then we're going to take our 15mm socket and we're going to go ahead and tighten these up the rest of the way. Okay, got that snugged up. Next step is we're going to put the brake pads back on. So again, making sure to have the rear facing one on the back side and the front side one on the front side. Slide those in tight against the rotor as much as possible. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and put the caliper back on. So we'll go ahead and disconnect it with however you had it up and out of the way. In this case I had zip ties, so I cut those out of the way. And we're going to slide it over the top, line up the holes on the back side, and take the two short silver bolts that we had and get those started on the back side. Again, doing it by hand. So again, go ahead and get those snugged up by hand. Then we're going to take a 14mm socket this time, as we did when we took it apart. And go ahead and tighten those up. Okay, so now that's all tightened back up. We missed one step here, guys, and it's a good thing we always go back and double check our work. We forgot to plug our plug back in, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so this is going to work just the opposite of how we took it apart. So we're going to take the Christmas tree shape and we're going to push that up through, again having the open side of the plug facing towards the engine. So we're going to go ahead and push that up until we hear a little bit of a pop. Okay, that one didn't actually make a nice loud pop, but you can see that the tabs are in fact over the edge. Take the connector that was previously already on the car, slide that into our plug, and again until we get a nice snap. There we go. And that is connected. Alright, so now we can go ahead and put the wheel back on, and then we should be good to go. Go ahead and remove the jack stand. And there we are. So there we go, guys. We've got it all put back together. So now if you only are changing the one side, you stop here. But if you need to change the other side, now is the time to do that. We're going to actually go ahead and change the wheel bearing on the other side as well, because we figure since this side went out, the other side is bound to go out as well. This procedure will be exactly the same, only flipped in reverse, but again, everything will be exactly the same. So feel free to rewind and rewatch this if you got to go to the other side. So there you go, guys. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. If it was, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe if you aren't already. And as always, we ask that you guys have a great day. So until the next video, we'll talk to you later, guys.